Okay. Okay, folks. So this is just an optional session. We've just pressed record. So I see all the cameras have gone off straight away. um, so the idea here is it's a Zoom session. It's a Q&A session. And if there aren't any questions, I'll maybe try help out with with progressing from where Pete left off on Monday. So Peter's session was recorded on Monday night, and it highlighted some of the key mistakes that people are making. And I think the biggest one that people make is in collision detection. That seems to be causing the most trouble. So you have a collision detection algorithm. I mean, your collision detection doesn't have to be perfect. What we've given you for Pong is about as accurate as it needs to be. So don't worry about being pixel perfect. Okay. Roughly, if it's in the area and it collides, then, once you pick that up with a simple equation. So equations are probably things that you need to consider. If you're having trouble with collision detection, these are usually the areas that you're having trouble with. You've hard-coded numbers, and therefore you don't have equations. So you've got to convert anything that's hard-coded into an equation or a relative position. And what we mean by that is you're not talking about an absolute point on the screen. You're saying relative to where I am. And that implies that you've got an equation that's going to have variables in it with a plus or a minus or something like that, or a distance value to work out the distances. There's a reference that I posted in the assignment tabs. There's a references tab, and one of them actually goes through very detailed in collision detection. So it'll help you map out how you need to figure out whatever is colliding for you, and how you might convert that into equations and into code. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have a very simple Pong game. And when people want to create multiple objects, we create arrays of those objects. And the most common problem is that people then try pass the array into a copy of the collision detection algorithm that we gave you. And therefore, you've got a full array, and therefore the checks that you're doing, people are checking against a full array rather than an element of an array. So the advice to keep it simple is within your draw method, you'll have a loop that's calling the collision detection method, and you pass in the element of the array that you want to check. Of course, that element will be called within a loop, so every element will get checked. And if you take that approach, I think you'll find that you don't get caught up in messing around with arrays with an algorithm that you maybe don't fully understand. Okay, so they're the big takeaways, I suppose, from Monday. It's a half-hour video. We've made it available. We had some trouble with the recording, but it's now available. Made it available last night. If you go into the assignment section, maybe I'll just show where that is in case anybody wants to get to it. Just share screen for a second. Let's bring that up. Okay. You seeing my browser at the moment?
We can see processing.
Processing. Oh, okay. I'm sharing the wrong screen. Sorry. I was wondering why everything disappeared on me. Let me switch over. There we go. Okay. So let's just show you where that is. So we're on week 9. If you go into assignment specs, there's assignment 2, and you can take a look at the video from Monday night, which will go over those issues. Okay. By pressing play there. Likewise, if you're in week 9, I have it in 2 places. So in week 9, we've made the cards available. So when we make a Zoom card available after the recording becomes available, the play button is underneath it as it becomes available. So later on today, I'll make this recording available here. Okay, so you can go back over stuff. Okay. Okay, so let's start with, has anybody any questions? Okay, Grace. Sorry, Grace had her hand up, so I'll go with Grace first.
Cheers, using the Zoom's features. Yeah, I just wondering. I was having a look through the spec, the rubric there, and it has for the overloading with the classes. Does every class need to have like overloading to count, as in like with the constructors, or can it be that some has constructors that are overloaded and maybe some have methods that are overloaded, or is it just the constructors that you're focused on?
Well, best thing I should do probably at this stage is to go take a look at that, and you can direct me to exactly which section that is, and we'll take a look at it. So let me go in again. Go into assignments. This is the assignment spec. We're in the marking scheme and rubric, and there's the detailed one. I should have been sharing that with you. Let me share again. Okay. So
I think it's E1.
Yeah. So section E, user-defined classes, at least 2 classes excluding the player class from Pong. So this is referring to the additional tabs defining classes, i.e. class definitions, and it looks for overloaded constructors. Okay. I think after what I'm going to do today, I think you'll create multiple overloaded constructors for every class that you have, whether you need them or not. So you'll certainly be able to create the overloaded constructors. And I'd recommend that you have overloaded constructors for every class. But maybe when it comes to the actual use of them, you're not using them all. So E3 won't be using an overloaded constructor, for example. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and would say would one count as that it's like empty, or that it would have to be that you're assigning some sort of attributes? Like say like you have like an initial class, like you're adding something to an array and it's initial, and then later on maybe you want to add another one, but you have different attributes for that. Would that be okay, or is that you still need to kind of assign values and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the idea of overloading a constructor means that when you're initializing the constructor or creating the object, it's not just picking up the default values that you can pass in parameters to initialize the object that you're creating. Okay, so if we take a look at the rubric in a bit more detail, if we look at this one, class definitions. So it explicitly says if you're missing examples of overloaded constructor, okay, it's going to get you short of getting the full marks in that section. So I would certainly say you're going to have the overloaded constructors defined in the class. Examples then of calling them, that really falls into part E3. The user-defined classes are used in an appropriate manner. Okay, now that doesn't mean that you have to use all of them. You don't have to use every single method, every single overloaded method that you created. But if you have examples where you're calling an overloaded one, all the better. Okay, I hope I'm making this clear. There's the definition where you absolutely need to define overloaded constructors. You don't necessarily need to use them all. And the difference between E1 and E3 is E1 is defining the class, and E3 is where you're actually using the class in creating object variables and then using those objects.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Now, just while we're on that, if we scroll across then and look for E3 where you're using it, you can see here it says start at the excellent level and work your way left. So if we come over to section, the one on the right, it says to get full marks, examples highlighting correctly, declaration and initialization, calling the getters and setters, calling an overloaded constructor. So if you want to get full marks, you should work in calling that overloaded constructor. Okay. If you don't, you'll still do really well. It's just, it's missing the overloaded examples is going to get you a 6 rather than a 7 to a 10. And again, it doesn't have to be every single class. But if it says missing an overloaded example is going to get you shy of the excellent category. So I think I've answered your question there. I didn't know the answer myself till I refer to it, because we've changed this a few times. So this is what we're going with. So hopefully that's it. Okay.
Yeah, that's great, Colin. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Okay. Tig, I think, was next.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's kind of related to the collision detection again, actually, that I suppose, actually, I think I just missed a minute or two what you said earlier, because I think Peter may have covered it on Monday. Is that right? Because I haven't watched it yet, or I didn't get a chance to catch it up with it yet. But basically, my question was more about like the collision detection, and then the impact then to the scoring, I should say. Because sometimes what I try to do, I suppose, is that it's just like it wasn't an array of functions, so it actually made it more difficult in my scoring. Actually, if it was array, it would probably easier. But anyway, I don't want to go into the detail of it yet, but just more about the collision.
So collision detection. Well, we have the rubric up. You can still see the rubric, yeah? I'm sharing it. Yeah. Okay. So D3 is collision detection. Okay. Again, let's start over on the right-hand side. It says collision detection with 3 objects to get you 7 marks. And then for 10 marks, collision detection with 4+ objects. Now, if we think about Pong, we had a paddle and we had a ball. That's 2 objects. So how do you get to 3 objects? How do you get to 4 objects? So I'm going to do a little bit before we finish up, and it'll show you, hopefully, how you can introduce new objects into your game to make to add new elements to the game that will make it a bit more difficult. Okay, I'm not going to cover absolutely everything, but I'll give you more than enough to show you how you can bring in the additional objects. The collision detection will be doing exactly what you've been doing with collision detection for however you've done it for the 2 objects if you've used the Pong collision detector, but you'll just be calling that collision detector on a new object. Does that help?
Kind of, yeah. It was more towards the the end of the game, when it comes to the scoring system, and then my scores are just going crazy because it's detecting so many collisions. But
Right.
anyway, that's but I kind of get what you mean anyway. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
That's so when you get when you're working on code, generally you have what's called a happy path. So that's where it does what you expect it to do, and then you have the edge cases, and the edge cases are at the very start and at the very end, or on a screen. The ball is moving. As it's moving around the screen, it's great, but when it hits any of the edges on the screen, you've got to do something special. So you've got to handle those special cases. If your scoring is working, but then it's gone mad when it starts detecting too many collisions, it suggests that you're not resetting a variable. Okay, what we covered in class this week is the concept of putting a flag up and resetting. So if you're using an array, you're going to have to reset all the values in the array. I might be getting a little bit too detailed here. If you're checking for some condition for an object and you say, yes, that's true, unless you reset it, it's going to stay being true and your scores are going to keep racking up. So usually the problem that you're describing is a case of just initializing something back to false or back to 0. It's a variable or a property that you just need to reset. And when do you reset it? That's the edge case. It's figuring out when do you need to reset it. What has happened that's making the scoring go nuts? When does that happen? Okay. So again, if you take a look at Peter's video from Monday night, he shows you how to put in some print statements so you can get additional information to debug, figure out where that logic error is in your console, so you can narrow down exactly when it's happening, and then you can write code using those values to handle them. Okay.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
I might have one, maybe
Hi,
a
Greg.
silly one. Hi. So it's about D2 handling key events, and
Yes.
so there is for like to maximize the score. Let's say working key handler up, down, left, right. So like let's say I have just I have up, left, right, but not down really, and I don't know at this stage like how could I implement that. So that means like yeah, that wouldn't work for like 7 points, I guess. Or
If you have left and right,
yeah,
it's similar
that'd
to
be
Pong, so you'd be in the category 4. Okay.
Yeah, and then I have up, but not down. Maybe
Yeah,
I will do
so
something.
you'd be in the 7 category probably
Yeah.
there.
Okay. Yeah, and also like
Hey, listen, the game that people do may not lend itself to getting top marks, to trying to get that elusive 100%. I discourage people trying to get 100%, you know, but I give you the marking scheme we're going to use so you can see in advance how it's going to be marked, and you can come up with a mark that you're happy with. There are other ways to add additional keys into your game to do different things rather than just navigation. Okay, so what we're saying is a working key handler, how many keys are you handling? So it doesn't have to handle, you know, left and right and up and down. It could be handling some other things.
Okay. So okay, and let's say I have like 2 possible like options. So the player can use like W, A, and D to move left,
There you go.
up, right, and then I can use arrow keys as well. That counts as like 6 keys, right?
They should be doing
Or-
different things. I
Okay.
haven't made that clear. I haven't made
Yeah,
that clear.
okay.
I would also suggest to you, you know, for example, if you are using letters, you know, uppercase and the lowercase is this, you know, depending on whether the caps lock is on, you find that your game may or may not work. So yes, you could be handling those additional keys. They're doing the exact same thing. So I think what we mean by the keys here is not that you have 3 keys that are doing the same thing. It's that each key is doing something different.
Okay. Yep.
Now, what it's doing, it could be exiting the game, it could be firing a bullet, it could be changing the speed, it could be, you know, it could be a million different other ways that you can bring that in. That's not clear. We were just thinking left and right, and then up and down is the obvious, you know, how you might improve on that. But really what we're saying is a working key handler, how many other keys? So to get 7, you'd want another 2 instead of just up and down with the left and right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. Yep, thank you.
No matter how hard we try, there's always confusion. We thought we had this one nailed, but we'll certainly take those things on board. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Rania.
Hi. With the collision detection.
Yeah.
So I have an object. I have say 3 objects, and one of them is hitting and doing something, and then hitting something else and doing something else. Does that mean I have only 2, or I have 3?
You have 3 objects colliding, yeah? So
But
7
they
marks
are
for,
not colliding like together. They're not touching at the same time. If that's
no, all 3 don't have to be touching. It's just that you have 3
Oh,
objects.
okay. Okay.
Oh no,
Okay,
we're not trying to make the impossible here. It's just that each object has collision detection, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So
Yes.
so if I bring it back to Pong, you had the ball and the paddle, so they can collide, right? If I add another object, let's say I fire in a bullet in there, I could have the paddle shoot the ball, so now the bullet would collide with the ball. So that's another collision detection.
Okay, thank you. And another question also is the player I didn't use the your player object,
Yes.
but I haven't yet included the J option pane.
Yeah.
So I did my calculation. I have level and I have health and I have life.
Yeah.
So now I'll just have to include the J option pane, but at the moment, sorry, at the moment I have them on screen, and when game over, then it's game over on the screen with.
That's even better.
So I don't have to have J option pane. That's my question.
No, has the rubric suggested that you have to?
It doesn't say so.
Like, let's do a search.
I think there's to get user input to kind of fill the arrays, like values and numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have it.
That's completely separate to what you've done, Rania.
Yeah.
So if you've put the scores and kept them on the screen, that's great. You know, and
I have score, health, and level.
Yeah.
And then game over. So I don't need to include my J option pane. That's my.
So let's take a look where I've mentioned J option pane in the rubric, and I've mentioned in section F1, but F1 is really the use of arrays.
Okay.
So what am I saying? I said the array of non-primitive set to a fixed size, values filled by user input. So for example, what we're saying there is you created an array and you're reading in some values and you're filling up the array. So J option pane is a way that you could take in user input to do that. Okay.
It's not just very. I just didn't find it aesthetically pleasing to have the J option pane. I don't know.
So how do you take in a value from the user?
Yeah, that's the thing. I didn't do it like this. I should, maybe I should ask for something else. Maybe I should include a tournament and then ask in J option pane. I didn't do the tournament.
And therefore player might be a friend. Player class might be a friend, and you just see that you're just reusing code that's there already. Okay, it's can you work that into your game?
But will that then, can I still count my player as a class if I used?
Yeah. So if I scroll here, user defined classes, at least 2 classes excluding the player class from Plong.
That if I used it all as it is, no?
Yeah, so you wouldn't include player as being a class. It is a class. You'll use it in your game. You'll get marks for different things, but we're expecting you to use more than 2 classes.
No, I have 3 classes and player.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah,
but fine. Player is not the player you give me, so
okay.
I might use maybe the tournament from it or something to add it, but will that count as a class or?
I'll have to wait. Yeah, I'll take that question after class. I'll sit down and see exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, I'll
reply.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe because I think I'm in kind of like a similar situation because I have like a player class, but it's like completely like I built it from the scratch. Like it's nothing like the Pong class. So I think I could like count.
Okay, maybe I can simplify it like this. In the past, when we gave out this rubric, and this is they change every year, right? But one of the things we picked up on was that people were handing up the player class, and it then was ticking all the boxes for most of the rubric, getting you to the 40% mark without you having a working game or without having done anything. So we're actually trying to actively work against that situation. So that's why I say excluding the player class that we gave you. If it's the player class that we gave you, we won't be giving you marks for something that we gave out.
No,
Okay.
but if
So
I
if you've
didn't
if you've
choose,
defined your own player class, it's completely different. That will
yeah.
be treated as a different class. Maybe put a different name on it, just to
Oh,
stand out a little bit, so that we
okay.
don't confuse it. I'm glad you brought it up in the Q&A, but hopefully you can understand what we're trying to work against here. We're trying to prevent somebody literally taking the player class, submitting it to us, and then using it in the reflection to highlight all the things that it does to get marks for arrays, to get marks for objects and so on, without actually having a working game or having anything working. So that's what we were trying to prevent. Okay, that's
Yeah,
why
okay.
it said excluding the player class. That's what we meant by that.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand.
Okay. Okay. We're a half an hour in. I might, if you have time, if you're happy with the answers, that's fine. I was thinking I might show how we would. Let me just stop here. So what I was thinking I might do, just to move things on a little bit, is I developed a real starter game. It seems like everybody's at the stage where their starter game is working, but maybe to help you increase your marks and how look at how we might add additional classes, I was going to do a little walkthrough on maybe building that up. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's boring you, or you already know it, feel free to drop off. But I was thinking I'd just walk through firing. Firing is something that can be added to most games. And a lot of the earlier games when they came out introduced firing in follow-up games. So I was going to look at how we might add a new object called a bullet, and how we might add that to our key handler. So you get in another key to handle, and then looking at some of the situations that apply. So we're going to build up a class. Okay. Okay. So I'm stopped sharing there, and I'm going to close this down. Just bear with me for a second, and I'm going to take a starter game, and I'm going to build this element into it. And hopefully I won't get myself into too much of a muddle. Let's see now. Okay. Okay, so I should be sharing processing screen with you at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cheers. So let's just take a look at what I've got. So this is I've got a hero that we can move around the screen. This is the blue rectangle at the bottom. And I can move them left and right, but I can also move them up and down. And I've got very little checking on this. This is just to demonstrate some concepts. So when I go past the end of the screen, it's not picking that up. When I'm going left and right, go off the edge of the screen, it's not picking it up. Okay. But you can see I'm printing out values to the console to show you what's going on inside as we're running the game. Okay. So the advice I had given was get a character moving around the screen. Yeah, which is what that is. So that's my hero in the game. Whatever the game is, this is the main character. And we also have a baddie. And the baddie, I've created a whole array of them, and they're dropping down at different speeds. So there's the concept of each bullet or each bomb there, or each baddie having its own velocity. So again, if I just run that little segment. So these things are coming at me. And what I want to do next is I want to be able to fire at them. Okay. So firing at them is going to involve what am I firing? Okay. So I'm going to ask you to help me out here. So if I wanted to fire something the bat. Let's start with what we've got. I've got a baddie and I've got a hero. The hero was that blue square I was moving around, and the baddie were the red circles that were coming down at me. And I've used these generic terms because they, irrespective of what game you're doing, you've got this concept in it. Okay. I just noticed my variable naming is poor there. That should have been lowercase b for baddie, and that problem will be replicated throughout. But I won't get into that so much. It's actually correct here. So hero width and hero height. So I've got a hero and a baddie, and I want to now add the concept of firing in this game. So I want to be able to shoot those baddies. So I'm going to have to create a new class. So I'll create a new tab, and I have to have the name of the class. So let's talk about what the new class might be. So I'm firing a bomb or a bullet or a missile. Somebody pick a name there that they're happy with. Shout.
Missile.
Missile. Okay. So I'm going to create a missile class. Okay. There we go. And I saw some of the questions that were coming in are that people are getting caught at the very, very start. And that's why I wanted to do this. So I'm creating a new class. It's a public class. And you called it missile. So it's not one I've done before, right? I open the bracket and I close the bracket. Now, that's where people are going wrong. So if you create a class, the class will have the properties or fields, okay? And it will also have methods. Every class, this is what we're doing. So hopefully by showing you this, I'm showing you indentation here. I'm showing you how to use different types of comments and to make your code more readable, okay? So we have properties, okay? And what you'll find is most of your objects will have very similar properties. So I'm going to go back to my hero here, and I'm going to just copy those properties just to speed things up. So the missile that we're going to launch is going to have a position. It's going to have an X and a Y position. Usually the missile will come, when it's fired, it will come out of the gun on the ship that's firing it. So we're going to need to know the X and Y coordinates of the ship to initialize it. So X and Y of the missile are going to be two important fields that we'll have. Also, how fast does that missile travel? So I've created a velocity field. And just something I've learned from the past is if you want to start simple and then you want to add graphics later, it's good to actually know the size of your object. So I'm using, in this case, we'll use a missile width and a missile height. Okay. And I'm just going to set those to 30 and 30. Okay. And probably want to have one more field here, which might be firing. So it's a Boolean variable and it's firing, or launched might be a better word. Okay.
You're missing the I in the missile.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Please jump in with anything like that. As I said, this is live off the cuff, right? I had to go with something similar this morning, but we've already started changing the names already. So let's see what happens, right? So we've got some fields to start there, right? Now, we also know that in our methods, the first method we're going to write is a constructor. So we have the default constructor. So why not, make it stand out like so, and then write it. And we know the default constructor starts with the name of the class. So there's the missile, open bracket, close bracket, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. Okay. And what does it usually do? It usually sets the initial values to give them all some default value. So let's just do that. We can change it later. So what we want to do is just to initialize all of these properties. So I'd say x is, it's probably best to do it this way. This.x is 0. And I get rid of all these privates. That didn't sound right. There we go. So what we're doing, I think it's worth actually seeing it being developed in front of your eyes, like so. This may just help some people. And we're just initializing everything here. So I'm going to initialize that to false. It's not launched yet. Okay. And if we go edit, auto format, you can see it's just tidied everything up nicely for me there with the indentation. So again, it's making the code easier to read, If it's easier to read, it's usually easier to maintain. Okay, so we had questions about overloaded constructors today. So let's take a look at how you're going to maximize your marks with overloaded constructors. Well, we have the default constructor. Let's do an overloaded constructor. Okay, an overloaded constructor just means that we have a method of the same name, but it can take in parameters. So maybe one version of the overloaded constructor would be to take in the x and y values. Now we know that the x and y are floats from looking up here. So we just add parameters to this method, float, and take in an x and take in a y. And then we'll use that x and y in the initialization here. So I just set that to x, set that to y. And I hadn't finished my initializations up here, so I better go back up and do them. I'm going to set the y to be the bottom of the screen, which is the height of the screen. So let's just do that for the moment. Set the velocity, just come up with some initial value, 5. Missile width and height, 30, and launched as false. Yeah, that's okay. And what we can see is the difference between the default constructor and the overloaded constructor is just that I've taken in these two parameters, and then I've used the x and y in the initialization of the x and y properties. So we're using the parameters passed in to set the value of the x and y properties in that missile. Okay, so that's an overloaded constructor. Now, that's one version of an overloaded constructor. Okay, but we could have other versions. So let's look at another one where maybe we just take in one Boolean value, which is whether it's launched or not. So this.launched is assign the value launched. So you could do something like that. So that's another constructor, overloaded. So that's, sorry, this should say overloaded constructor 2, and this one should say overloaded constructor 1. Everybody following me? Is there anything I've done that's caused an upset? Please shout. That's all right. Okay. Cool. And you could continue that process, creating additional overloaded constructors. So there's no reason why you can't maximize your marks on that. Let's create a third one. Third one takes in the x and y values and maybe the velocity. And the velocity was an integer. So yeah, I hadn't initialized it up there to be 5. Okay. So there's 3 overloaded constructors that we've defined. Again, let's just auto format that, and that tidies everything up. Now, that's good that I just demonstrated that, because in auto formatting, you'll notice that the overloaded constructor 3 is indented inside of overloaded constructor 2. And that's because I forgot my closing bracket, my closing brace there. So if I put that closing brace in and then I auto format again, you'll notice that the indentation brought overloaded constructor 3 back out. Okay, so this is a common thing that's happening, that we lose track of our curly brackets. The auto formatting will help you find those. Okay, so again, I'm missing the curly bracket for the end of the class. Just put it back in there. See how it's your friend, yeah? Okay, so we've written a hell of a lot of code there, and in writing all of that code, we've actually started ticking off a lot of things that are in the rubric. So we've defined a new class called missile. We've set up its properties. We've made them private. We've got a default constructor, and then we've got 3 overloaded constructors. Okay, we're creating the template for how a missile might be used. And we're not ready yet. We still have some more stuff to do, because we're testing about object-oriented code. And when we write object-oriented code, we had this phrase inherit encapsulation. And that meant that we only want to be able to change the values that we've set to private by using getters and setters. So I would start at this stage by defining all of those methods. Okay, so again, I'm just going to create a comment here like so. And I'd put in getters. And now I'll start by creating all of those getters. So I need a getter usually for all of your properties, not necessarily all, but most of the time it is. Let's take all of those properties that I defined as a starting point. Okay. And what I want to do is to write the getters for these. Okay. So a getter is just a method that you call. It's called get whatever the property name is. And it returns whatever data type that property is. Okay. So I'm going to change the word here, private to public. It's returning a float, and it's called get x bracket. It's going to have braces, begin and end. And then all your getters do is they return the property. So it's this.x. Okay, so now I've got a way of returning the x value for the missile. Need to do that for each one of these properties. So let's go through it. Again, we'll change public, change the y to get y. As I've mentioned, other editors will actually write this code for you automatically, but processing doesn't, so we'll just do it manually.
So do we have to do them all, or only the one that we need them to use? Like,
so this is the thing. When you define a class, you're defining how it might be used. So even before you get into using it, what's the approach you would take? Well, here's the properties I know this object is going to have, so I need some way of getting at them. Okay, so I would suggest to you that before you even think about writing the code to use them, it's define the class the way you should define the class. So this is the approach I would take. I would actually write out all the getters and setters before I start writing the code, because otherwise what will happen is you'll say, oh, well, I don't need to have, you know, get missile width, get missile height, or set missile width and set missile height, and you leave them out. Be damn well sure the minute you leave them out, you know, 2 days down the line, you're saying, oh, I need that. So it's probably best to just write them all in one go at the start.
okay.
Because there's, as I said, you can get editors that will write this automatically for you, but this will actually help the concept of getters and setters get into your head as well. Remember that the target here is to teach programming, not to build a game. Okay?
I know, yeah. I get it away myself.
Okay, so and this is why I thought I'd take advantage of the session just to show you you know, this would be the approach I would take. And it's mundane, but hey, it has to be done. And you can see the advantage of doing this is you're building up. It's you can see it's easy to build up classes now. It's the same stuff over and over again. Okay. And it helps those concepts get into your head. Okay. Maybe width and height, let's leave those two out. And well, for getters, I'd actually, no, I will want to know the width and height later. So what did I have? Yeah, and it's best to just get in the headspace of doing it, because you start making mistakes like I just did there a moment ago. So public float, missile width, bracket, but change that to a capital M and get. Okay, get rid of the semicolon, put in 2 braces. Then what goes in between them? It's a return statement because it's a getter. And what are you returning? It's the this dot missile width. And then you have something similar for the height. So let's just copy that one. Okay, so that can go. And when it's Boolean, sometimes we don't use the word get, because it might be better to use a different word that we saw with Pong. So instead of saying get launched, it might be better to say is launched. So you're asking the question, is it launched or not? Okay. So public Boolean is launched, bracket, curlies, and then you're just returning that Boolean value, this dot launched. Okay. Again, just do a double check with your auto format, make sure everything's looking good. Okay, so there's all your getters. So I've written a whole lot of methods there, and we didn't even think about it. Okay. So you'll also want corresponding setters so that you can change values. Now, you don't necessarily always want to change every value. So maybe you might want to leave out some of those. But let's take a look at some of these, right? So we can do this this way. I'm going to take all of these, just going to copy it, add in my comment. So now I'm doing the setters. Okay, and then I'm going to paste in all that getter code, and then I'm just going to change it. So when we're setting, we're taking in the values. So it's set x, and we're taking in a float, which is x, and then we're saying this dot x is assigned the value x. Okay, that's my set x. Do the same for all the rest of them. Okay, public void maybe better. So I'll do the same for all the rest of them. So it's public void set y, and that's a float. Taking in y, this dot y, assign the value y. Same here. Set velocity, took in an integer called velocity, and this dot velocity is assigned a value, the velocity. Okie doke. And I'm going to leave these ones out because I'm not going to change those. Set launched maybe. So public void set launched takes in a Boolean. Boolean is launched. So now I can specify how I want that to be set. Okay, so this is, I think it was section E1 in your rubric. This is creating the class methods. Okay, and we have setters, we have getters, we have constructors, overloaded and default, and we have our fields. So I've written a hell of a lot of code there, and it all works even without trying it. And then there's a couple of other things that we've at this stage you probably have identified. So other methods. Okay, so if you're following along with Pong, you will have remembered we have a display method. Okay, which is going to draw the object on screen. Okay, and we have an update method. And again, you can take these straight from Pong and then you just change them to be, well, the display is how you draw the object on the screen. So a missile looks a bit like an ellipse. So I'm going to use the ellipse to draw an ellipse. Okay, so forget about your game. Just let's start looking at this class, and maybe you guys can help me out here. So I want to draw an ellipse, and this is the information I have to work with. So you know what the parameters for drawing an ellipse are? It's the X and Y, and it's the width and the height. So bearing that in mind, maybe you can shout and tell me what I should be putting in to draw my ellipse. Go for it. I'm on strike till somebody talks.
Actually, a missile should be coming from your hero.
Accent. Oops.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
Go ahead, sorry.
I meant X and Y.
Yep. So I use this.x, yeah.
This dot X, this dot Y, and then the widths and the heights.
So sorry, this.x, this.y. And for the width and height, this dot, what was my width and height called?
If I remember.
Well, let's go back up. So
Yes. Missile widths, missile heights.
Yeah.
So this missile heights, this missile widths, I guess.
Exactly. So do you see how we're not looking at the game, we're just looking at the class. We know we're going to use this in our game, but this just means we're focusing on a smaller problem here. Okay. So that would draw an ellipse, but that's going to draw it as a circle, right? And a bullet or a bomb.
You need the radius to be.
So we could divide. We'll assume the bomb is going vertical, so it's going to go up the screen. Okay. Use the right finger there, up the screen. And therefore we'll take the width and divide it by 2. Okay. And that will draw, instead of a circle, it'll draw an ellipse because we don't have the width and the height being the same there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how you might display it. Now, let's just add one more thing to it. How would you change the color? How do you change the color for an ellipse?
Fill?
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So pick a color.
red. Oh,
Zero.
what other colors are there? Yeah.
So
Black.
not one of the ones we've had already. We've got a black background. We've got a blue hero,
Okay.
and we have red bombs coming down at it. Red aliens.
Yellow, I guess, maybe yellow.
Yeah. So give me the color for yellow.
Oh.
Color
Google it.
selector. Right. Yellow.
Yeah, that's what I do usually.
Right. There you go. And I could just copy that value and put it into there. That's one way of doing it. Okay. And we've seen that before. So now you know how to get a color, and I could just maybe comment that that's yellow. Okay. So now we've got a yellow ellipse. Yeah, a yellow missile that's going to be drawn. Okay with that? Now, what way does the bullet? We said the bullet was going to, or the missile is going to go up the screen. So, what would you be doing if the
changing position of the
so
of
which property do you change to make it move up the screen?
the X and Y.
Y
Y.
coordinate.
Yeah.
Y.
So
the Y, yeah, of course.
so it's this.y. Okay. And what are you doing to it every time? If it's going up the screen, are you increasing its Y value or decreasing its Y value?
Decreasing.
I would say plus.
Decreasing. It's
So
going.
two for
not going
decreasing,
down.
one for increasing. Let me explain. The origin in processing is 0, 0 is in the top
In the
left-hand
top.
corner.
So it's minus.
So it's minus. Great. So we're going to be subtracting every time. So one way of doing it is say this.y minus equals. And what are you subtracting from it every time?
Velocity.
Yes. So you see where that comes in? So now we can put the velocity in here to subtract the velocity. There's a hand up, Ignis.
Like why we're not using a getter and setter here?
Because I'm doing it in the class.
Okay, because I'm always using getters and setters even in the class.
Yeah, and you can, right? But you do have access within the class, and you can directly access the properties inside a class, but not outside a class. The getters and setters are to give permission for to change those properties outside of the class. That's a great question.
Okay, but if I'm using that, like that's still correct.
It's fine to use them. Yeah, you can still use them. Yeah.
No, okay. And the display and update should be lowercase and is missing void.
Say that again.
Display.
Yeah,
The
miss-
display and update should be
course.
lowercase and missing void.
Correct. Okay, let's do that. Okay, great. So we have an update method and we have a display method. And this is starter code that I think everybody can follow, and it will change, but this is a starter code. Okay. Now, so we have a lot of code there, and then we're going to put it to the test. So I have this game, and I'm going to need to create a missile. So I'm going to need to declare an object variable to use this new class that we've created. Right. So let's create an object variable. So it's going to be of type missile. Okay. And we can give that a variable name. What variable name would you like me to use? Shout.
Maybe missile.
Everybody wants to go with missile. Yeah, that's fine. So you can do that, right? But there's no reason why you couldn't also do something like you could, the bomb. You can use whatever. You don't have to use the exact same name as the class. But if you're happy to use the name of the class, that's fine. Just make sure it's lowercase. Okay. So now we've just declared one missile. Okay. So we've got that missile, and we're going to want to take a look at the code we've already got and create a new one. So somewhere in our setup, we'd want to maybe initialize the missile. We could do it here. So we've already initialized, for example, my hero and my baddie. I called a frog in a car. Okay. So now I can come along and create a new missile. So missile is a new, and I'm going to call the constructor missile. Okay. That would call the default constructor. If I come back over here, I can see, well, what other way could I call it? So I could call the default and it's going to initialize it like this. Or I could call it using an X and a Y value. Yeah. So if you wanted to get an example of an overloaded constructor, we could pass in, for example, some X and Y value. So I could just say the X is the width divided by 2, just to demonstrate this. So it puts it in the middle of the screen, and the Y position is going to be the height of the screen. just to show that you can call an overloaded one. And we can replace this code later, but this should get us started. So I've got my missile set up now. It's initialized. And in draw, we need to decide whether it gets displayed or not. Okay, so I'm drawing the other objects on the screen. So just after I've done those, I can decide if I'm going to draw my missile. If we look down a little bit further, I've used the key handler that I refer to in the assignment. I gave you a little video to look at for a key handler. So what I might do is continue that key handler and add in some handling for handling if I press, for example, F to fire. So I'm going to have, if I fire, I'm going to say fire is true. And that means I'm going to need a new Boolean variable. Fire. And in the key release, I'll handle it there as well. So just copying that down here. And we'll just set it back to false. So this means you can only fire one bullet at a time. Okay. Now, so this is going to pick up that I've pressed F to fire a bullet. And when I fire a bullet, I want to see that on screen. So let's start and see how we go. So I've got this object called missile. And it has an update method. And we have a display method. Okay. So I'll only want to show this on screen if I've pressed fire. So again, let's start out with how we might address that. So we know that when I press the F key, fire is set to true. So I can test if fire is true. So if fire is true, then I want to update and display. Otherwise, you don't need to see the bullet. Okay, so let's have a look and see how we're getting on. Probably made a few mistakes. Yeah, that should be 5. Okay, so that was the original game. I left the bullets fire off there. And now if I press F, and you can see I've got a bullet going up the screen. Okay, now what I will describe to you is, I'll just run that again, is that when I press the F key, currently, if I leave it go, the bullet stops in its path. So I've left it go, and now I'm pressing it again, leave it go, press it again, leave it go. Okay, so that's not exactly what we want, but we're on the right track. So I'll run it again. What I want to be able to do is press that and the bullet goes up to the top of the screen. But I want that to happen just when I press the F key once, not when I'm holding it down. Okay, so let's take a look at what's happening and see if anybody can help out. So I've got a display method, which is drawing the ellipse nicely. So we're happy with the display method. The velocity is working. It's continually going up the screen. And that update is being called 60 times a second by the draw method. This is the draw method. We're saying if fire, okay, but fire is set to true. And the minute you release it, it's set back to false. So any ideas how we might get around this problem?
Double equals true. With fire equal true.
Same thing. Yeah. So when you say for a Boolean variable, if you say if fire, what you're actually saying is if fire equals true.
Maybe we're missing else it's false. or no?
I wasn't paying attention bit now, but I think maybe we should have a variable inside missile to
Cool.
have
And we
like
do. And we
how
do.
to have it as fire. So missile set
So let's
fired
hang on. So we
equals
do
Oh,
have
fire
what you're asking for
oh
or
yes.
launched. Yeah.
launched, right? So
So we
what
should
should
set that
we do?
true.
We need to set that to true when? When do we set it to true?
Like on
If key
if keys
is
if
release. Okay.
yeah on fire equals true. But then it will release like it all the time if we like hold the button. I'm not sure there.
So what we could do is pick up the fact that that very first time that it picks it up, if fire equals true, that means we've just launched a missile, right? Yeah. So that's when
This is the first time, yeah.
the first time you come in, that's when you want to set it to true. Okay. So we want to set launched. What are we setting to launched? It was the missile. Yeah. Dot set launched. We have is launched. We have what did I call it? Go down to my setters. Set launched. Yeah, I was right. Set launched, and we can set that to true. So when it picks up that I've pressed the fire key, I can say missile dot set launched and pass in true, and that's going to update that property. Okay, so now we can change our condition from if fire or something else. So we can test if the fire is set to true or if the launched property is true, then we want to continue this update. Okay, so we can say if fire or where am I? Is launched. That reads nice, doesn't it? Instead of get launched. And I need a closing bracket. So now I've got a compound condition. So if I've just pressed the fire key for the first time, or if the is launched property is true, then it's going to continue updating and showing the bomb going up the screen. Let's try it. Unexpected token.
Bracket is missing beside fire.
Yeah, sorry. If fire. Oh, that better?
And the missile, I think. Missile that is launched.
Thank you. And a semicolon missing. The joys of live, huh? Okay, so now I'm going to fire. And it's gone all the way up the screen. Okay. Now, that's a starting point. Now we might want to, now that we've got this idea that it's the update is making it go all the way up the screen, we might want to take a look at the update method again. So I'd go back in and look at my update method. Here it is. And that's quite simple. But what happens when it gets to the top of the screen? What would we want to do? So the missile launches, it goes all the way up to the top of the screen. Once it gets to the top, we want to bring it back down to the end. We want to reset it, yeah? So what we could say is we only subtract the velocity if it's greater than 0. Okay. And what are we checking? We're checking if the Y position of that bomb is greater than 0. If that's the case, then we'll subtract the velocity from it. So we're taking away to make it go up the screen. Okay. And what happens if that's not the case? Well, then we can have an else. Else, that means it's less than 0. So what do we want to do? We want to reset it back. So we want to set this.y to be, and my default was height. Okay. And again, probably best to put in the curly brackets because you'll probably end up changing the code after. And as soon as you add in another line, leaving out the brackets is going to cause you trouble. Okay. So let's have a look at that. So I'm firing, bullet goes up to the top. It's gone down to the bottom. Okay. So it's still firing. So we'd have to there's something else that I need to reset, which is, I can't remember. You get that's, I think that's enough for now, because we're on the call now a lot longer than I thought. It's an hour and a quarter. So I'm just going to stop sharing there. And hopefully you can see how we've gone through that. We've built it up by starting with just a class. I have an object, and you have enough examples of objects that you can use that as starter code, and then you can overwrite. Set up your constructors, set up your getters, set up your setters. And for any object that's going to appear on the screen, you're going to have an update method and you're going to have a display method. And then the inner workings of those are going to change accordingly to the game that you're building. But I've shown you, I think today, how you can build that up from nothing. Okay, any questions on what I've done? A few more people in there. Okay. All right, guys. Hopefully that's given you some motivation to add more classes to your game, show you the approach you would take. We've tied that back to the rubric to show you how that would help with your marks. And that concept of update and display being called from the draw method is how you are going to get different things into your game. So I'm going to leave it there if there's no questions. Okay. Right, so the recording will be available on the website in just a bit. Okay. And I'll hang back if anybody else has any other questions. Okay, thanks very much, guys. Best of luck.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.